Chapter 128, Punishments, Hanyu's POV. I love you, Hanyu. Antony's voice was strained and miserable, and he glowered at his own lap as he spoke, not meeting Hanyu's gaze. His enunciation was still sloppy and indistinct, and even with all that, the words landed like a lash. Worse than a lash, in fact. Hanyu had been incredulous when his master had called all his suggestions for punishment too harsh, and now he was even more confused. Hadn't Antony said that he would punish him later, when he was stronger? Why had he changed his mind? And most importantly, did the god really think that this was kinder? Antony wouldn't do that to me. The mantra sounded weaker, more like wishful thinking, every time. The evidence was incontrovertible at this point. Hanyu's punishment had been decided, whatever else his master might claim. His worst fears were confirmed. The kiss had been a taunt, after all, and only the beginning of Hanyu's nightmare. Antony was really doing this. He was continuing this charade, this vicious, cruel mockery that made Hanyu feel like his heart was being ripped right out of his chest. And he was doing it on purpose. And why not? Hanyu's brief flare of anger collapsed into dull misery. It's his right. He can discipline me as he pleases. Even if I hadn't done anything wrong, he could do whatever he liked with me. And I did do something wrong. I did everything wrong. I forgot my place and deliberately disobeyed my master and got him injured as well. He's right to choose the most terrible punishment possible. Gods, he didn't even choose it. I did. What did I expect, asking what he meant by the kiss? I didn't leave him any choice. Poor Antony. He was so gentle and generous, so reluctant to punish, and his horrible slave just kept forcing his hand. Had there ever been such a wretched failure of an attendant before? Probably not. If any of his predecessors had been as awful as Hanyu, the gods would doubtless have shut down the temple centuries ago. Antony started speaking again, his words tumbling out faster and faster until they were almost unintelligible. And I know that's my own problem and not yours, and I swear I won't push my feelings on you. Well, I won't do it again, I should say. That's why I'm sorry for kissing you. You deserve better than some mutilated beast pawing at you. You deserve everything, the world. You're wonderful, and I swear I'll leave you alone. Leave me alone? Hanyu had been trying to brace himself so that he could accept this unforeseen discipline with at least a modulum of dignity, but at this horrible new threat, he couldn't restrain a loud gasp. But you said I could stay, he cried, voice already hitching over a sob. My lord, please, I'm sorry. What did I do to make you change your mind? Please, I'll do better. Please, just give me one more chance. No. Antony released his grip on the sheets, his bandaged hands flying up in what seemed like alarm. I didn't mean it like that. What did I do? Hanyu wailed. He knew this was ridiculous, that he'd been begging just the previous day for Antony to get rid of him. Now that the idea had been raised, though, he found he couldn't bear it. I know I shouldn't ask for this when I don't deserve to be kept. I'm sorry. But please, my lord, I won't ever do it again if you just tell me. What did I do over the last day that was worse than all my other sins? And he was just so kind about remembering Jen's pencils, too. Did it happen since then? He's been asleep since I got here, so was it something I said, this conversation? How could anything I said be worse than everything I've done? How will I ever figure it out? Of course you can stay, Antony slurred, leaning forward until Hanyu feared he'd topple right off the bed. I never meant you shouldn't. I just meant I won't kiss you again. Hanyu ached to believe him. Could his punishment truly be over so quickly? That was just like Antony, to call the whole thing off the moment his point had been made. A fierce wave of love for his wonderful, kindly master swept through Hanyu. Had any one slave ever received so much mercy from a god? He collapsed into a grateful, tearful puddle. "Thank you, my lord," he exhaled. "You're so much kinder than I deserve. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I swear I learned my lesson. I won't ever be so presumptuous again." Antony was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was rough and strangely thick. "I truly am sorry," the god almost whispered. "I never meant to distress you so much." Oh no! How could his master still be apologizing after everything Hanyu had done? How could Hanyu have thought his punishments too harsh for even a moment? If Antony himself felt so much guilt for disciplining his worthless slave, then Hanyu deserved it all even more for forcing him into it. "It was no more than I deserved, my lord. I only hope the rest of my punishment will be so effective." "Punishment?" Antony asked. Weren't we talking about the kiss?" Well, this was a quagmire. Hanyu wasn't supposed to like a punishment. On the other hand, it was unthinkable to express reluctance for the god's touch, especially intimate touch. Every time Antony had brushed Hanyu's hair, the day he'd hugged him in Thad's rooms, the nights when he'd been allowed to sleep in the god's bed, each had been an honor, the sort of indulgence that the priests had always said the offerings would have to earn with flawless service. But a kiss? Hanyu had been trained to beg and grovel for the chance to serve his master sexually, but a touch as intimate as a kiss had always been presumed to be so far outside an attendant's reach as to be laughable. He could never say he hadn't liked a kiss, and if he wasn't supposed to like punishments, he couldn't directly call the kiss a punishment. But then what was he supposed to say? "I don't mean to be ungrateful," he pleaded. "The kiss was wonderful, my lord. I know it's wrong of me, but I've dreamed of something like that for so long. Even under the circumstances, it was more than I deserved. Hanyu?" His master sounded half-strangled. "Could you please slow down?" Hanyu shut his mouth at once, so quickly that his teeth clacked loudly together. Had he already ruined it again? Had he annoyed his master with his prattle? Was it his presumption in bringing up all those blasphemous daydreams of kisses and intimacy he hadn't earned? Or was it just an order? Gods, what he wouldn't give for more orders, more services to render, and chances to prove that he could be good and useful and pleasing if his god would only keep him. "I'm confused," Antony said at last. "Aren't you upset because you didn't like being kissed?" I'm so happy you kissed me, my lord," he whispered at last. "I only wish I deserved it." "You deserved a much better kiss than that," the god growled. "With my lips all stitched and my tongue gone and everything. And then I fainted on you. I'm so sorry. It must have been disgusting." Hanyu flinched at the visceral with which his master spat the word. "You have stitches because you protected us. How could I ever be disgusted by that, my lord?" "Just because you like being alive doesn't mean you want me pawing at you," Antony snapped. "I could never be disgusted by you, my lord," Hanyu amended, a little embarrassed by the way his voice trembled with worshipful sincerity. Why should he be embarrassed, though? A slave had no dignity and no reason to blush at his feelings. It was only right to adore his god. Moreover, Antony already knew how he felt, both his proper love and reverence and his wicked, blasphemous desire to be loved in return. How else would he have been able to construct the perfect punishment? Hanyu had no secrets from his master and no reason to feel as though he were revealing too much. Antony knew it all already, and it all belonged to him anyway, Hanyu's body and mind and thoughts alike. It was wrong for him to want to keep any part of himself back from its rightful owner. "Well, I can," Antony huffed a breath. Would you please sit up? Hanyu obeyed at once, swiping a sleeve over his face in hopes of clearing away the worst of the tears and snot. His master was still teetering precariously at the edge of the bed, and Hanyu had to fight down the urge to pick him up and situate him more securely. Once that impulse was conquered, he dared a peek at Antony's face. The god looked miserable. Hanyu had never seen him so wretched. His mouth was tense, and his shadowed eyes seemed somehow haunted. There was a brittleness in the lines of his forehead, at least those bits of it that Hanyu could see under the bandages, that seemed almost angry. When he spoke, however, his voice was rough and pleading. "I'm sorry," the god whispered, so much remorse in his tone that Hanyu's eyes filled afresh. "I've made a mess of everything. I still want you here. I never meant to make you think I didn't. You don't have to kiss me or serve me or anything. I'm just grateful to have you here." Hanyu stared as best he could through his tears. What could this mean? Do you cry and pretend to be afraid? Is he still unable to frighten someone without apologizing for it? You cling to him, you fill his days with your endless demands for his attention and affection. You weep and carry on whenever he shows the sense to try to pry himself loose from you, and you offer nothing in return. Marcus's words were never far from the top of Hanyu's mind, and he seized on them easily now. What else could explain his master's sudden guilt and backtracking? Marcus was a horrible, awful god, and he'd had no right to take Asao's eyes or hurt Antony the way he had. Hanyu was glad he was in prison, and he didn't care if that was blasphemy. But he also knew Antony better than Hanyu could ever hope to, and he'd seen right to the core of Hanyu himself as well. He would have had no trouble making sense of all this. Hanyu's master was kind and generous. He hated giving punishments, and when he did, he worried that they were too harsh. There had been priests like that. Hanyu remembered one young novice who had balked at the restrictions on the offering speech, muttering that it didn't seem right to give physical punishments for verbal slips. He'd been shuffled off to a post in records. An older priest, one of the men who had overseen Hanyu's training with the onions, had undergone a change after some tragedy struck his family outside the temple. If Hanyu remembered correctly, he'd lost a younger sibling or a nephew. After that, he stopped handing out punishments at all. If he caught one of the boys misbehaving, he just pretended he had something pressing to do and hurried along. He was finally sent to be father over a little village church, far from the city and the boys. Another priest had left entirely, forsaking his vows and holy orders after being told to punish a boy from an older cadre who resisted one of his intimate service instructors. Whenever such a soft-hearted priest appeared, the fathers had always seen to it that they had had little contact with the boys. Offerings required strict discipline. No infraction, however small, could be forgiven. It had been truer of Hanyu than any of the others. He was stupid, no matter how many times Antony kindly insisted otherwise. He was a dumb, bumbling camel, crashing around and making a mess of everything. He needed to be punished, beaten, humiliated, deprived of privileges, publicly shamed. It was the only way a terrible, selfish slave like him could learn anything. He needed the rod, and plenty of it, not a gentle touch. But dear, compassionate Antony hated to see anyone weeping or afraid. He couldn't exercise his rightful authority without apologizing for it, not so long as Hanyu failed to take his punishments cheerfully and gratefully, as he should. The priests always warned me about my crying and carrying on. I never realized how awful a problem it could become. It never even occurred to me that I might be in danger of using my tears to manipulate a god. I should have known. Everything they tried to teach me was for my own good. Who was I to decide which lessons mattered and which didn't? I was so foolish and arrogant, and Antony has been paying the price. I have to do better. I can't take advantage of him anymore. He deserves a better attendant than me, but the least I can do is make myself as good as possible for him. Hanyu still couldn't stop crying, but he did manage to steady his voice as he said, "Thank you, my lord. You are far kinder than your servant deserves." Antony was silent for a long moment before he spoke again. "I got very lost at some point during our conversation, so I'm just going to ask you straight on. Do you want me to kiss you again someday or not? Tell the truth. You won't be in trouble either way." Whether this was being offered as a pitying balm for Hanyu's shameful weakness, or as a chance for him to request his punishment as he should, any temple-trained boy would know the right answer. Hanyu straightened his spine and tried to smile through his tears. Fresh fear welled up in his gut at the idea of the punishment continuing. His heart pounded and his head spun dizzily, but he somehow managed to turn up his lips. "Yes, please."